I have been blessed in my adult life and my career. I always wanted to be in broadcasting from the days I was on a farm, and my dad gave me a corner of a chicken house that he wasn't using, and at age 12, 13, 14, I turned that into a make-believe broadcast studio. And I used to put the milkers on the cows and then run out and read the news on my little station in Fairmount, Indiana. I dreamed back then, and I think I was 13, 14. I wanted to be in broadcasting, and one day I wanted to be in Washington, and one day I wanted to be a White House correspondent. And I've had my dreams fulfilled over and over. I can say that in my career, and probably many of yours, but there's never been a day that I haven't gone to work where I didn't feel God's hand, and especially in journalism, because when you're out there covering people, you've got to every minute remind yourself of your responsibility to these people. And in broadcasting, they have the fairness doctrine. And news, long before Fox News hijacked Fair and Balanced, there were many of us who really did take that to heart. Every day, we worked very hard to be fair and balanced. I know a lot of you think the media today doesn't spend much time on that, but there are still reporters out there who have that belief, and they're working hard to fulfill their obligations. The biggest story of my lifetime, I was the subject of, and I hadn't planned it that way. It happened at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida, where I became the first 75-year-old to ever receive a bone marrow stem cell transplant. And this was after I had gone to another one of the top 3 cancer centers in this nation, and they had looked at me and told me after 3 days that I was too old, that they absolutely would not do a stem cell transplant, and that I should question anybody who might be willing to do that. And so I came back to Moffitt. I'd already been there, and I said, "What say you?" And the doctors at Moffitt said, "Well, this other institution may be right. We don't have a crystal ball, but we've looked you over, and we think that you're up to it, and if you want to do it, we're prepared to do it. And if you don't want to do it, we fully understand." And the doctor said it'll just be less work for me. But I had been given an 18-month death sentence. The only cure to MDS, myelodysplasia, which is a disease where the bone marrow does not produce healthy blood cells, the only cure was a stem cell transplant. And so, on July 4th, 2012, my room at Moffitt Cancer Center, in walked the nurse with this bag, a bag of life, stem cells from an unidentified donor. All I knew was that he lived someplace in the United States. And I'll never forget that first night that I was in the hospital. This nurse technician, Maria Garcia, came up to my bedside and she said, "Now you listen up. I'm going to tell you what you have to do if you expect to come out of here alive. And for a moment, she sounded like a drill sergeant, and then she turned in to my chaplain.
I'm all about being positive. You have to be positive. You can't entertain it negative. You gotta come here, you gotta be positive. You gotta come here with a kind of kick butt attitude, you know, and I come into work, I'm sorry, but to me, I have, the Lord is with me, you know. Like I said, I'm not a Bible beater, and I don't go to church every week, you know, and who God knows how the church will behave if I showed up one day. You know, but I carry the church wherever I go, you know, in any little area, you know, you can talk, you can pray, you can feel the Lord in your heart, and they're with you all the time. You know, you pray for your patients, you pray for this whole hospital, you know, that's what I do when I come in. I'm already invoking my archangels and the Lord, you know, for guidance and caring and everything for everyone, you know. And it's what it's all about. If I can't do that, I couldn't work here, you know.
I knew I was in good hands when Maria Garcia finished with me. I am now headed towards 3 years. I am so blessed. I am in complete remission. I am 100% Eric Priest in my bone marrow, and there's no evidence of any of my disease. But I want to talk to you a little bit about Washington. And my years in Washington, I was there for some of the most tumultuous times that this country has ever seen. I was on that White House lawn that day when Richard Nixon walked out the red carpet, headed towards the helicopter to leave the White House in what was the biggest constitutional crisis this country had ever had. I was there for 7 presidents. I was a White House correspondent the day, that Sunday morning, that the 38th president announced that he was going to pardon the 37th president, a decision by Gerald R. Ford that cost him his own election as president. Ford being, in my view, probably the most decent president of modern time. I was there for the 39th president, Jimmy Carter, as he achieved the impossible. He got ratification of the Panama Canal treaties. Now, nobody thinks about that today, but stop for a moment with all of our other hotspots around the world. If we still had the Panama Canal, what we would be going through. But Carter was able to get that ratified, and he was able to get it ratified because he worked with a Republican, Howard Baker, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. And he helped get the votes to get that ratified. And that decision by Baker cost him a chance of ever having the Republican nomination. I was there for the 40th president, the assassination attempt, a remarkable presidency when you look at what was accomplished in the way of foreign policy, the Soviet Union, yet a presidency that unfortunately went out on sort of a sad note with the Iran-Contra scandal, and who knows why that happened, but there was a lot of activity that the Reagan presidency didn't take the blame for. You had Ollie North and John Poindexter, who were basically being the president it appeared, but we never did find out just how much Ronald Reagan had to do with that. And again, had it not been for Howard Baker, who was brought in by President Reagan to be his chief of staff, Reagan would have ended up in a lot more trouble than he did. The 41st president, the first Bush, it was amazing. Gulf War I saw his approval rating go up into the 80s, and then, before it was over, he couldn't get reelected. And why couldn't he get reelected? Because of the extremist in his own party, who never forgave him for promising during the campaign that, read my lips, there will be no new taxes. But when he got there, he found the economic situation to be where we needed to have taxes. And he did what he had to do at the time. But he wasn't beaten by Democrats. He was beaten by the extremist in his own party. The 43rd president, jumping ahead, the second Bush, I don't think that we will ever know what he would have been like if he had not had 9/11. He arrived in Washington on a campaign of being a compassionate conservative. I think that's where his heart really was. But with 9/11, everything changed. Obviously it changed, but people changed. I mean, I had covered Dick Cheney for years when he was chief of staff for Gerald R. Ford. For those of us who had known Dick Cheney back during that period, we didn't recognize him by the time his vice presidency was over. A totally changed man. And who wouldn't be changed when you come to work every morning after 9/11 and you have the CIA and your other DIA intelligence people there telling you about how the country may be blown to smithereens before the day's over. The 42nd president, Bill Clinton, one of the smartest presidents we've ever had. By far the best politician we've ever had. And he was able to get a lot done. But yet, his presidency then and in history is marred by the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal. And I don't think anybody will forget this, probably one of the biggest presidential lies in history.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people. Thank you.
There was something about Washington during that period, not just at the White House, but all throughout the city, where you had a feeling that the country, the public officials in Washington, had lost their ethical and moral compasses. But along the way, there were some really nice, encouraging stories that I had the opportunity to cover. And one of those was in Cleveland, Ohio, a company called Lincoln Electric that is operated by the Golden Rule. And it all started years ago with the founders.
In 1895, after being laid off from his manufacturing job, John Lincoln decided to start his own company. He later brought in his brother James to manage things. When the Depression hit, Lincoln Electric suffered along with everyone else. Desperate to keep their jobs, workers went to James with this proposal.
If we promise to work harder
and we in fact can improve the productivity of the company, will you share the benefits at the end of the year with us in a fair manner? And James Lincoln actually directly said yes.
The profit sharing, which began in 1934, has continued to this day. The Lincoln brothers were encouraged to have high moral standards by their father, an itinerant minister.
He preached so much the Sermon on the Mount and the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Over his career, JF, as he was known, wrote frequently of his moral principles. If we follow the philosophy of Christ, we shall have the proper answer to the problem of layoffs. When we treat the worker as we would like to be treated, the answer is plain. Continuous employment is needed to secure the cooperation of the worker. It is also basically sound.
Lincoln Electric is the world's largest manufacturer of arc welders. And every year, as we said, they have a bonus. This year's bonus, average bonus for all of the workers, was $34,000 per worker. And the deal is that if you work for Lincoln Electric for 3 years, you will be guaranteed a job for the rest of your life. You may not, during the hard times, you may not have the same job, but you will have a check coming in. During the good times, overtime is mandatory. And it's really a marvelous company, and as I said, it has to be one of God's best stocks. This gives you an idea of where I've been, what I've seen, and sometimes when you look at the media and you think, well, it's nothing but bias. It's much more than that. And that is that we reporters see so much of the raw that it is very difficult to keep the cynicism out. And that's the one thing that I worry about more than anything else, worried about when I was a reporter. Because you really do get jaded. You see both sides of the political aisle here, and you want to say plague on all their houses. But anyway, I had a terrific career. I had more fun, and I was able to get through it because I approached journalism with the golden rule.